As Gary said, I'm supposed to be talking about the work of the church, but it's almost lunchtime. So before we get to that, where's my clicker? I'm going to tell you about my favorite restaurant. If you ask me, or if you ask my wife, what our favorite restaurant is, it's this one. It's Hokkaido. It's in Winter Springs. If you ever want to take us there, we will let you. It's a great restaurant. It's a Japanese restaurant. They have sushi and other yucky stuff, but there's some things that is really good. And if we ever get a chance to go, we'll usually choose there. We don't get to go as often as we would like, but every time we go, we'll say this to each other. We really should come more often. If we don't, our favorite restaurant is going to close down. It's going to close down. We recently went on a date and went to a different Japanese restaurant, and I've censored the name. Maybe you can figure it out. It wasn't as good. It just wasn't as good. And we ourselves felt a little bit of guilt for going there like we were cheating on our restaurant. You know, the good one. Hokkaido is going to shut down and it's going to be all our fault. So we felt a little bit of guilt about that. If you don't support a restaurant with your presence, it very well may close down. And while that might be sad when it comes to a favorite restaurant, it really doesn't matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't have eternal consequences. In reality, when push comes to shove, we can cook at home, and I have cooked some of our favorite dishes that we get at Hokkaido. We've cooked it at home, and it's been maybe 90% as good, and for half as much. And there's a little bit of pride involved with doing something like that yourself. So it's not all that bad of a thing. If you know anything about me, if there's anything that can be done myself, I will do it myself. DIY, those are three of my favorite letters. I almost said words. DIY, those are three of my, it's almost lunchtime, so you have to forgive me. There's entire channels devoted to DIY. There's entire magazines and internet web pages and that sort of thing. It is a very common thing, and I think it's a great attitude to have. From changing the brakes on your car, it's important to get that right. You don't have to be particularly smart to do that. You can learn pretty much whatever you need to learn DIY on YouTube, on the internet. You can learn how to change a toilet. It's not so hard. You can do that yourself. You can learn how to tile a shower. You can learn how to rebuild an entire engine or even remodel a house or build a house from scratch, DIY. It's not that difficult. You can watch YouTube videos and learn almost everything you need to know. I don't think there's YouTube doctors yet, but give it a few more years, and there very well may be YouTube doctor degrees. I don't look forward to that time, actually. It's a great attitude to think that even if I don't know how to do something right now, I can figure it out. I can do it myself. I can get there with a little bit of help. There are some jobs, like maybe dentistry. You can actually Google search do-it-yourself root canal kits. I don't know if they're real or not. But do-it-yourself dentistry is not one that I would recommend. There are some jobs that are best done with help. Do it with help. DIWH is not as clean of an acronym as DIY. That just sounds cool. DIWH, do it with help. It's not as good, but some jobs we really just shouldn't do by ourselves. And this DIY attitude is a very, very good thing in many cases. But when the DIY attitude creeps into the church, it can become very dangerous. It can become very dangerous. You know what else they have on YouTube is church services. Our church service in particular, and right now, there are multiple people watching online this particular service. Not only ours, but many thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of other church services or other religious services are online. So some have taken to doing, quote-unquote, church themselves at home, meeting by themselves at home and squeezing in God where they can into their lives, rather than having God the central focus of their lives and squeezing in the rest where they can. They have it entirely backwards. Before the COVID lockdowns, worshiping God and assembling with the saints was a central activity for my family on Sundays. Everything was scheduled around that, and I think it's a good thing. But when we, for a few weeks, had to worship at home, at least for us, it felt disjointed. It felt like, and your mileage may vary, but for us, it felt like worship was more of an inconvenience. It was, we had our Sunday now, and Church was something that we had to kind of fit in between the kids' naps and eating and doing laundry and all the various things that just go along with everyday life. It was more difficult for us, probably because of the kids, but it was also less central. It was less important. We got less out of it. It was seen as a hindrance rather than a blessing. The things quickly morphed into, sitting there and paying attention, being very diligent to, we were kind of cooking while we were listening, or we were running around and being distracted with various things, or just pausing it and waiting until the kids went to bed so that we can just watch it later by ourselves on fast forward. Things got out of hand pretty quickly. Now, if you're sick or otherwise unable to make it on rare occasion, I think streaming worship service is a good thing. It's better than nothing. But that's why we provide it as an option. But it's by no means a wise replacement or a long-term solution. So why not? What role does the church play in our lives? What does it do? What is the work of the church? Before we can answer those, I think we need to back up just a little bit and clarify, what do we mean by church? What is the church? Biblically speaking, the church is people. The church is not a building, not this building or any other building. This building is no more a church than, say, a lab coat is a doctor, or army boots is a soldier. That is not what it is. A doctor can be a doctor regardless of what they wear. And people, the church, can be the church wherever they meet. We can meet out in the field, and we would still be the church. Even if there's stained glass and pews and religious-looking things, that does not make a building a church. It might look fancy, but it's not a church. Also, the church is not an individual. This is what I look like at home sometimes when watching online. A church is a group of people assembled together according to Scripture. It cannot be done as an individual any more than a single cow is a herd of cattle. If I had a single cow, I couldn't say, "Look at my herd of cows." I could say, "Look at my cow," but I wouldn't have a herd. I would need a few more than that. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 18 through 20, first of all, when you come together as a church, he's talking to a group of people here, more than one person. An individual can't come together, but multiple people can come together, and that's what the church is. Verse 20, therefore, when you come together in one place. And again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 16 and 17, he says, we, though many, are one. Just like if there were many cows, they would be one herd. So we, though many, are one. So that is what the church is. That got messed up. What kind of people? So the church is a group of people assembled for a particular purpose. What kind of people should assemble? We need to notice that the church is primarily not for people who are not Christians. The church is primarily for those who have already dedicated their lives to Christ, those who already know a little bit about Jesus, who have already decided to follow him and to do the right thing. The church is not primarily for wicked people or sinners, other than us as we as Christians sinning from time to time, but that's another matter. And this is something that is obvious for a lot of us, but for other people, if you were to say that, that sounds quite backwards. Yet God says, even though we are already Christians, even though we're already following him, he says for us to assemble at minimum every first day of the week. Sure, visitors are welcome. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, that is something that Paul mentions there, that visitors are welcome in the assembly and it could be helpful for them. But primarily, Hebrews chapter 10, we see that it is the believers who are said to have been assembling. It's primarily for Christians. So what's the purpose of this assembly of Christians? What's the purpose of this assembly of Christians? Why is it important for Christians to assemble as the church? And what's our purpose or work that we as the church are supposed to do? I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about some of the main functions of the church, because this is a sermon. It's the law. I'm contractually obligated to, anytime there's a list, I have to use alliteration. I can't just use 4 words that start with different letters. That would be madness. We have to use, I had to shoehorn these 4 things to start with the letter E. So forgive me, I apologize, it's the law, we have to obey the law. So number 1, the 4 E's of the church, the first one is edification. teaching, preaching, that sort of thing. We see in 1 Corinthians 14. Number 2 is encouragement. This is fellowship, correcting other people, benevolence, that sort of thing. We see in Acts chapter 15 as well as 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, the first few verses there. Number 3 is worship or exaltation. That's worship, basically. We exalt God, we exalt his name. And number 4 is evangelism. Those are, broadly speaking, the 4 major roles that we're to engage in as we are assembled as the church. So I hear you saying, but I'm mature enough to be able to do those things at home. I'm a mature enough person that I can do my own studies. I don't really need the encouragement. I can worship and evangelize wherever I am or by myself. So do I really need the church for those things, or can I DIY it? Now, certainly you don't need the church to interpret the Bible for you like some people will say, and you don't need the church to do some of these things, and you should do a lot of these things on your own. But does that mean that there's no role for the church to play? Because God did say for us to assemble as a group. And there must be a reason behind it. So what's the big deal about actually getting together in one place to do these things? Why can't we just do it ourselves, or at least do it remotely? I work remotely, in my pajamas usually. And if I had to go somewhere and get the kids dressed and get them in the car and buckled in and bring the diaper bag and all the snacks and all the things and all the complaints, it would be a lot easier if we could just do it ourselves at home. There's a lot less fuss, a lot less hassle. God sees our heart, after all, doesn't he? There's a short answer, and I think this is a great question. The short answer is that the church is pictured in the Bible as a body. The church in the Bible is pictured as a body. One member is an eye, another is a hand, one is a foot, and all of these pieces work together to supply what the others lack. Paul describes it brilliantly in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, talking about the body or the church of Christ. We all have a slightly different but important role to play in the lives of one another. If a hand is working properly, it's a beautiful thing. It can do great work. It can paint beautiful pictures and all sorts of other things. But only when it's working in concert with the rest of the body. I'm sure blind people could paint something, but not as well as someone who had a hand and an eye, right? So a hand working in concert with the rest of the body is a beautiful thing. It can get a lot done. But a severed hand, all of a sudden, is not only is it not beautiful, it's a gruesome, horrific thing. A hand by itself. I didn't find any pictures of severed hands or anything. But you can imagine, don't imagine severed hands. Imagine like someone who has very beautiful hair. A woman with beautiful hair, maybe it's curly or straight or whatever you like. And you go to her house, and in the bathroom, you pull out long, nasty hair that's been clogging the drain. And when it's on her, it's great. It might smell like flowers or, look shiny and be brushed. But when it's off the body, when it's no longer integrated into the body, it's this nasty, disembodied, less than useless thing. It'd be one thing if it was useless, but it's actively hampering something that you want to get done. Brush your teeth or whatever, but the sink is all filled up because all this hair is gone. You get the point. The church in the Bible is presented as a body, something that comes together and works together, and we're greater than the sum of our individual parts. Just as a body is greater than the sum of its parts. So Milan, for instance, he's a great engineer. He's more useful, put together. But if his arm was over here and his leg was over here and his head was rolling around down the hall, he'd be substantially less useful for his family. It would be a sad situation, but I'm glad that's not the case. A finger alone dies. A finger alone dies. Yes, you can and should do some of these aspects by yourself, but we can't fulfill all of what God wants us to do, and we can't be all that God wants us to be separately. And that's the short answer. The long answer, we'll go through these 4 things. The long answer, number 1, edification. I sure hope that you are spiritually mature enough to study the Bible on your own. Much, or even most, of what you learn ought to be in self-directed study. You ought to be interested enough to study for yourself. But can you learn everything that you need to know solo? Likely not. So I have a passion about science and history and art and a number of other things. If I was on vacation and had no obligations whatsoever, I would probably be learning something just because I'm interested in it. But math, if I wasn't forced by threat of failure in school to learn algebra, I would still, to this day, very likely be blissfully ignorant of algebra. There are some things that we can teach ourselves, and there's other things that we don't take to as quickly, that we need someone else to teach us. And when we're dealing with religion, we're necessarily dealing with things that are dealing with hard topics, sensitive topics, things that we're doing wrong, things that we need to change. It's hard to examine ourselves. It's easy to look at other people and see their faults, but it's hard to examine ourselves. And we're naturally disinclined to do that a lot of times. So we need others to help us with that. So if we were left up to our own devices, we might stick to just the things that we like. We'll read a few passages about the love of God. We might talk about Noah, throw in a little bit of David and Goliath, and like bingo bango, that's all we need from the Bible, right? That's not it. That's not the case. It's often needed for us to confront difficult things. For that, we need others to say the things that we won't say to ourselves. Gary recently did a series of sermons on the New Age movement. And would I have studied that on my own? Probably not. Would you? Probably not. Am I glad that I learned all of that stuff? Yes. And I can see the value of that after the fact. And if I saw on YouTube a sermon about the New Age movement, part 1, and part 2, and part 3, how many parts were there? 6. If I saw a thing that was six videos on the New Age movement, would I have watched it? Probably not. Probably not. But I'm glad that he thought enough to teach us that. And there's a lot that we learn from it. Connor recently did a series of lessons on the wills of God, whatever in the world that is. But I learned what that is, and I'm very glad that he taught me what that is. We learned a lot from that. Many of us would not have studied Revelation or Daniel or much of the Old Testament for that matter, but together we've gone through the entire Bible multiple times. Even the obscure parts like Obadiah. It's famously the least read book in the entire Bible, Obadiah. Or the Song of Solomon. We're better for it. We're better for it. Left to my own devices, I'll just eat cereal and pizza. But if Jeanette makes me lunch, I can almost guarantee you that it'll be delicious. But I could also guarantee that it probably would not be something that I would have made myself. There's oftentimes like a salad or something involved. But if someone who cares about you is preparing something for you, then it's very likely that they will give you things that you would not have given yourself. But it would be something that is good for you. Number 2, encouragement. Romans chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, Paul says this, "For I long to see you, that I may be encouraged together with you by the mutual faith of both you and me." Encouragement. Admittedly, encouragement is more necessary for some people than others. If you're extroverted or introverted, you need different levels of social interaction and encouragement. Some people can, see a person once a year, and that's as much as they need. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but some people, if you haven't seen someone in the past 5 minutes, you're getting lonely. So yes, this is more important for some than others, but it's safe to say that everyone needs some encouragement or correction or assistance from time to time. John the Baptizer, prophet of God, he was a cousin of Jesus himself, and when times got tough, do you know what John did? He had to reach out to others for encouragement. Paul wrote half the New Testament, frequently needed encouragement and received it from the church, as we see here in this passage in Romans chapter 1. Peter and Barnabas and others, when they met face to face with Paul, they received the correction that they sorely needed. It was only when they met face to face. Now, if those giants of the faith sometimes felt down and needed encouragement or correction, I think it's okay if you and I do as well. And it's not just needing a pickup when we're feeling down. As we fellowship and spend time together, we become more knit together and care about people in general. We mean more to one another. Colossians chapter 2, first couple of verses there. I can't tell how many times in casual conversation that I've seen my brethren and it has helped me strive to become better. That's something that you can't really do if you're doing it at home by yourself. Just this morning, I was asking Brother Frank, how you doing? And almost always what Frank will say is he'll say, thankful, very thankful. But today he surprised me. He didn't say that. I'm sure he's still thankful. But today he said, I'm running on fumes. But he said, he had his mask on, but it looked like he was smiling anyway. He said, I'm running on fumes. I'm running on fumes? What does that mean? He said, I only got about 45 minutes of sleep. And he's not one to exaggerate. If I said that, I really got 4 or 5 hours of sleep. But how encouraging is that he cares that much about the Lord's work in the church and assembling together with his saints and encouraging others and learning that he will come here even though he's only had minutes of sleep. It's encouraging. How much more should I come if I only got 5 hours or 4 hours or whatever the case may be? I remember seeing Nikki in Bible class. She has a Bible that's like this thick. Here I am exaggerating it. This thick, and it's got like a dozen bookmarks that she had hot glued into her Bible. And if you tell her to open up, you'll see notes and highlights and scribbles all over all the pages. She takes Bible study very seriously. I see that, and I say, wow, what a great example. I talk to Jeff, and I ask him, hey, Jeff, how's it going? Almost always, what will Jeff say? Doing better than I deserve. Guess that's true. So am I. No matter how I'm doing better than I deserve. And it's only when we have these face-to-face interactions can we do that. If I see someone and they're feeling down, then I can go and talk to them, encourage them, and see how I can help. So these kinds of examples can be multiplied many, many times over. I'm sure you guys can think of lots more. But maybe you really are more mature than all of these people. You're more mature than Paul and Peter and John and every one of us here. And you don't need encouragement. I doubt it, but let's just say that's the case. If that is the case, and you really are this superhuman giant of faith, then you certainly have a lot of encouragement to give to us mere mortals. So we need you even more especially if that's the case. Even if you don't need it, the rest of us do. And we're encouraged when you're here, and we're discouraged when you're not here. If you can think of someone who could have been here today and they chose not to be here, does that make you feel good or does that make you feel sad? It makes me feel sad when I think about the dozens of people who could have been here but chose not to be. It's discouraging. Maybe I shouldn't take things as seriously as I do if they're not. When we meet together as the church, we're also serve as a light to the community. In Acts chapter 2, the Christians often met in public places and they found favor with all the people. It's because they were interacting with people in the community as well. So we are here to let people around us know that there are people who love God and serve God, and we're willing and able to help them however we can. We couldn't do that if we're meeting privately, secretly, in our own homes or basements or whatever. Number 3, exaltation, or worship, if you will. Sure, we can sing or pray on our own, and oftentimes we do, but we're missing out on the benefits that God intended for us to get out of worship if we're all alone. It's like buying a Lamborghini for the cup holder. Sure, you can do that, but you're missing out on kind of what the intended purpose of the thing was, right? You're missing out. You're missing something. You could utilize that a little bit better. When we sing songs of worship to God, we're not just singing to God. And he goes out of his way in the New Testament to tell us that we're not just singing to him. It's a reciprocal act. We're singing to one another, he says over and over again. Ephesians chapter 5 and Colossians chapter 3. We're supposed to sing to one another and teach and admonish one another in our songs. That is part of our worship. And I can't hear you when you're singing in your home. And you can't hear me when I'm singing in my home, thankfully. Left to my own devices, I likely would not learn new songs. I likely would not be singing songs at all if it was up to me. A lot of people, music is very integral to their life, but for me, I could listen to music, I don't mind it, but if I went 4 or 5 years without listening to music, I don't think that would impact me very much. But when I'm here, when singing together, we can learn new songs, we can do things that we would not otherwise do. When singing a song together, the right song can move a person and motivate us in ways that little else could. It's one thing for me to sing, when upon life's billows you are tempest-tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one. It's one thing for me to sing that, but when I see someone who really has gone through the tempest, when the billows really are tossing them, when I see them sing that, all of a sudden it's a whole different ballgame. Guy told me this morning that he's still sleeping in his recliner because he can't lay down. There's too much pain. But he's here. Worship is not just singing, of course, as Gary said in his lesson just a few moments ago. Hearing others pray. Asking for prayers. Partaking in the Lord's Supper together. Having opportunities to give, to support the work of the church. All of these things we ought to do together. It's beautiful to see little kids tossing a penny into the plate. It's beautiful. We miss that. And finally, this morning, and then it's off to lunch. Finally, this morning, evangelism. Evangelism, yes, is largely the responsibility of the individual Christian. But as a church, we can and do support evangelistic work that brings the gospel to places that we would never be able to step foot ourselves. We are saving souls with the evangelism that the congregation here supports that we will never meet this side of eternity, that we will never even be aware of. There will be people in heaven, saved and forgiven of their sins, because of things that we are doing here as we meet together as a body. So to bring things back full circle, my favorite restaurant is Hokkaido, as I'm thinking fondly of lunch. And if I and people like me don't support it, and if you don't take me and my wife out to Hokkaido every once in a while, it will close up shop. And it will go the way of many a restaurant before it. And that's fine, I guess. It doesn't have eternal consequences. But if we do not support the work of the church, there are certainly eternal consequences for that. If the church's work is not supported, if the work of the church is not seen as important in my life, in your life, the church will wither and die. If we are allowed to be kept afraid, then the work of the church will begin to wither. The Church of England is predicted to be extinct within the next 20 years. One of their archbishops, I believe, said that. Older generations are dying off and newer ones are not attending or supporting the work there. The Methodist attendance is down about 30% in recent years. Presbyterian is down about 50% in recent years. It's been said that the danger of missing church is that eventually you'll stop missing church. I think you know what this means. If we fail to assemble with the saints, that eventually complacency sets in and we will no longer miss assembling with the saints. The church and the work of the church should be important to us because it is important to Jesus. He died to establish it. I would only die for something that was very important to me. He paid an incredible price. That should be a good indicator of how much God values it, and he wouldn't have established it if he thought that it was unimportant or optional. So what are you doing for the body of Christ, for the church of Christ? What are you doing for the person sitting next to you, or in front of you, or behind you? Well, I don't really know that person. Well, maybe that's a good place to start. I'm pretty familiar with the various parts of my body, and maybe we should be more familiar with our fellow members of this local body. Sitting in a pew every Sunday does not make us Christians any more than sitting in a doctor's office makes us a doctor. The work of the church is important. Let us support it. If we don't do it, nobody will do it. And we as Christians need to get to work. Thank you.